Welcome to the Talkyloggy podcast. Today, listeners, I'm tackling a big question. How do you see the future of science fiction literature? Will science fiction maintain its independence or intertwine with other literary genres? I'm your host, Clent Logronio, and I'm here to give you an overview of the possibilities that the future of science fiction literature holds. For starters, it's important to understand the history of science fiction literature. The genre as we know it today has its roots in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when writers such as H. G. Wells, Jules Verne, and Mary Shelley wrote stories that explored the possibilities of the future. Since then, science fiction has become a genre of its own, exploring topics such as new technologies, advanced societies, alien life, and alternate timelines. As science fiction has evolved, it has often intertwined with other literary genres. For example, science fiction and fantasy have often overlapped as writers explore imaginary worlds and creatures that are far beyond the realm of reality. Similarly, there are many examples of science fiction and horror, such as classic stories of alien invasions, zombie outbreaks, and post apocalyptic wastelands. Looking ahead, it's difficult to say whether science fiction will continue to maintain its independence or if it will further intertwine with other genres. On one hand, science fiction has a long and rich tradition of exploring topics that are unique to the genre. On the other hand, science fiction often shares common themes and ideas with other genres, and it's possible that these connections will only become stronger in the future. One thing we can count on is that science fiction will continue to explore new and exciting ideas. Writers will continue to imagine the future and ask questions about the world around us. It's also likely that new technologies such as artificial intelligence and virtual reality will become increasingly important to the genre. In addition, science fiction will continue to be influenced by current events such as climate change and global pandemics. No matter what the future holds, science fiction will remain a vibrant and exciting genre. As technology continues to advance and our understanding of the world deepens, science fiction will provide us with new perspectives on the possibilities of the future. Well, listeners, that's it for this episode of Talkyloggy podcast. I hope you enjoy my discussion on the future of science fiction literature. Whether it will maintain its independence or intertwine with other genres is still to be seen. But one thing is certain, science fiction will continue to explore new and exciting ideas. Thanks for tuning in, listeners. Don't go yet, as we have more discussions to talk about. We'll be right back, listeners. Good day.
Welcome to the Talkyloggy podcast. I'm your host for today, Rubhie, and I am here to explore the relationship between science, fiction, and culture. Also, its boundaries with reality. I will be talking to an expert to gain his perspectives and insight on this topic. Today, I am joined by Dr. Clent Smith, a professor of English and Cultural Studies at the University of Cambridge. I am excited to dive into this topic, so let us begin. Good day, Dr. Clent Smith. Let's start this conversation with a question. How do you view the relationship between science fiction and culture?
Well, good day, Miss Ruby, and thank you for having me here in your podcast. Well, science fiction has a long and complicated relationship with culture. On one hand, it has often seen as a form of escapism, It is a way to explore ideas and possibilities that exist beyond the boundaries of the real world. On the other hand, science fiction often serves as a lens through which we can, explore the cultural, political, and social issues of our times. It can also be used to imagine alternative futures and to critique the present. Well, Mr. Ruby, would you mind if I ask you the same question on what is your view on the boundaries between science fiction and reality?
Hmm. I think the boundaries between science fiction and reality are often blurred. Science fiction can be used to explore and explain scientific concepts in a more accessible way and to foster an appreciation for scientific inquiry. Additionally, science fiction can often serve as a bridge between scientific fact and the unknown, providing a way for us to imagine what might be possible in the future. Well, that's a tough one, Doctor. Moving on with the discussion, Doctor. What role does science fiction play in cultural discourse?
Well, Miss Ruby, science fiction plays an important role in cultural discourse as it can bring attention to issues that may otherwise go ignored because it allows us to explore ideas and possibilities that are not necessarily grounded in reality. It can provide a space for people to think more deeply and creatively about the world around them. It can also be used to critique existing systems and to imagine alternative futures.
Very good statement, Dr. Smith. Now, if you have to say something to our listeners, what advice would you give to them looking to explore the boundaries between science fiction and reality?
Well, thank you for that. Uh, my advice would be to read and watch as much science fiction as you can from both classic and contemporary works. Well, this will allow you to become familiar with the genre and to be better understand the boundaries between the real and the imagined. Additionally, I would recommend exploring some of the critical work that has been done on science fiction as this will help to contextualize and better understand the genre.
Well, I guess that concludes our exploration of the relationship between science fiction and culture. Also, its boundaries between science fiction and reality. Thank you to our guest, Dr. Clent Smith, for joining us in today's podcast. That was a very beautiful conversation. Thank you for joining us, listeners. Stay tuned as we move on to the next podcast episode of Talkyloggy. Stay tuned and we'll be right back.
Hello, listeners. Welcome again to the Talkyloggy podcast. I am your host, Clent, and today we'll explore the relationship between science fiction and the development of science and technology in our lives. We'll discuss how science fiction can both influence and be influenced by real world science and technology, and whether it is accurate to say that science fiction has had a role in the development of our lives. For many of us, science fiction is a source of entertainment, but it also can be a source of inspiration and ideas. As a genre, it often looks at the potential implications of scientific advances and technology and how they could shape the future. Many of the scientific and technological developments we take for granted today were first imagined in science fiction. For example, the idea of a smart home was first proposed in the book The House of the Future by Fritz Lang in 1924. This book was the first to imagine a home where the appliances and features would be automated, controlled by a central computer. This concept of a smart home has now become a reality with advances in home automation and the Internet of Things. Science fiction has also been a source of inspiration for inventors and scientists. In the early 20th century, the science fiction magazine Amazing Stories published a series of stories about a machine that could travel through time. This sparked the imagination of many scientists and inventors who then went on to create their own versions of the time machine. This is an example of how science fiction can influence the development of science and technology. By imagining the potential implications of scientific advances, science fiction can often act as a source of ideas and inspiration for inventors and scientists. It can also act as a platform to discuss the ethical implications of these advances, helping to inform our decisions about how to use them in the real world. However, it is important to remember that science fiction is just that, fiction. It is not necessarily an accurate reflection of the real world, and it is not always possible to develop the ideas presented in science fiction into real world technology. For example, in the book entitled The House of the Future, the author imagines a home where all the appliances are automated and controlled by a central computer. While this idea has been developed in today's smart homes, it is still far from being a reality. In order to achieve this level of automation, we would need to make significant advances in artificial intelligence and robotics. So, while science fiction can often act as a source of inspiration and ideas for real world science and technology, it is important to remember that it is ultimately fiction. We cannot rely on it as an accurate reflection of the real world, and we must be careful not to overestimate its influence. In conclusion, science fiction can often act as a source of inspiration and ideas for real world science and technology. It can spark the imagination of inventors and scientists and help us to think about the potential implications of scientific advances. However, it is important to remember that science fiction is ultimately fiction. It is not necessarily an accurate reflection of the real world, and we cannot rely on it to make advances in science and technology. And that's it for today's episode of Talkyloggy podcast. Stay tuned, listeners, as we will discuss more about science fiction. And later on, we will review a sci fi movie. We'll take a short break. Welcome to the Talkyloggy podcast. I'm your host, Clent Logronio. Today, I'm so excited to be speaking to an expert on the topic of sci-fi fanatic people. We'll be discussing what it means to be a fan of science fiction, the media consumption habits of being a fan, and the unique aspects of this subculture. So, without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. I'm joined here today by Professor Rubhie, the head of the Science Fiction Studies Department at the University of Oxford, an avid sci fan, and an expert on the subculture of sci fi fandom. Welcome to the show, Professor Ruby.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Clent. It's great to be here in Talkyloggy podcast.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure for me. Um, let's start off with a basic question first. Oh, what is a sci-fi fanatic?
Basically, a sci-fi fanatic is someone who is passionate and enthusiastic about science fiction. They may be fans of specific authors, movies, or television shows, or maybe all of the above. They may also be involved in fun activities such as cosplay, fan conventions, and online forums. I would also like to add that science fanatics are often very engaged and knowledgeable about the genre. They can be quite creative, often writing fan fiction and creating art and costumes inspired by their favorite stories.
Well, I agree. I agree. Sci-fi fanatics are a unique subculture with their own distinct values and norms. They often find community and connection through their shared love of sci-fi. That's a great explanation, Miss Ruby. So, what do sci-fi fanatics consume?
Well, to tell you that sci-fi fanatics consume a very wide variety of media, including books, television shows, movies, comics, and video games. They often seek out new and obscure stories and often consume multiple forms of media in order to gain a deeper understanding of the world they love. Sci-fi fanatics are also often quite active in consuming and discussing media. They may be involved in online forums and discussion groups, and they often watch, read, and play multiple pieces of media at once.
Indeed, I agree, Miss Ruby. Sci-fi fanatics often go beyond passive consumption and actively look for ways to engage with the media they love. They may create fan art, write fan fiction, or even create their own stories. That is a fascinating explanation, Miss Ruby. What are some of the unique aspects of the sci-fi fanatic subculture?
Well, sci-fi fanatics have a unique set of values and norms, including a deep appreciation for a story and a willingness to imagine and explore alternate realities and the curiosity about the unknown. They are often highly creative and have an acute sense of wonder.
Yes. Sci-fi fanatics often have a strong sense of community, and they may participate in activities such as fan conventions or online discussion groups. This sense of community often helps to foster a sense of belonging and strengthens with their love of the genre. That's really interesting, Miss Ruby. What do you think are the benefits of being a sci-fi fanatic?
Being a sci-fi fanatic can be an incredibly rewarding experience, It can give you a sense of connection and belonging, and it can also help to foster imagination and creativity. It can also be a great way to explore different worlds and learn more about science, technology, and the future, of course. Being a sci-fi fanatic can also be a great way to meet people with similar interests and form strong friendships. It can also be a great way to express yourself and your love for the genre.
Very well said. And I agree. Being a sci-fi fanatic can be a great way to connect with others and explore different worlds. It can also be a great way, to escape from the everyday and explore the possibilities of the future. Well, thank you for all such an in-depth and interesting discussion, Professor Ruby. So before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts on?
Well, I think I said enough. Thank you, Clent.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Professor, for your time. Well, listeners, up next, we will be discussing, or rather, we will review a movie called The Adam Project. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to Talkyloggy, a podcast about all things in science fiction. Today I'm joined by one avid sci-fi nut who will be giving us his review of the Netflix movie entitled The Adam Project. So, without further ado, let's jump right in. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Clent. Good day, Clent. How are you today?
Well, thank you. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having me here.
I'm glad to hear that. So now we'll be reviewing the movie, The Adam Project, which I'm supposed you already know since you're an avid fan of sci-fi movies. Now, Clent, What's the overview of this movie? I bet this is a beautiful movie to watch.
Well, indeed, that's a great movie. Well, for the overview, The Adam Project is a Netflix original movie starring Ryan Reynolds, Mark Ruffalo, and Zoe Saldana. The movie follows the story of Adam, a 13-year-old boy whose father has recently died. Well, to cope with his loss, Adam goes on a time traveling mission to the past to try to, reconnect with his father and find out what really happened.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful overview. Can you tell us what's the plot of this movie?
Well, sure, okay. Uh, well, for the plot, the Adam Project follows Adam as he goes on his mission, accompanied by his father's former colleague, Captain Walker. Well, for your information, Adam travels back to the year 2024, where he meets his father and learns about a mysterious project his father was working on. Adam and Captain Walker then travel back even further to the year 2042, where they discovered that the project his father was working on was a time traveling mission to save the world from a catastrophic event. Adam then has to find a way to save the world and get back to his own time.
What a wonderful movie indeed, Mr. Clent. As for the acting, how will you describe the actors?
Well, for the actors, their acting skills are superb, very interesting, very beautiful acting skills. The acting in the Adam Project is top notch. Ryan Reynolds and Mark Ruffalo are both excellent in their respective roles, and Zoe Saldana shines as the mysterious Captain Walker. The performances are compelling and believable, and the actors bring a lot of emotion to their characters.
No wonder this movie is great, as it includes the best of the best actors. Now, how about the visuals of the movie? Do you find it great also?
Yes, yes, yes. Visuals are stunning. The production values are high and the special effects are impressive. The movie uses a mix of practical and computer generated effects to create a truly immersive experience. So, wow, wow. I said, wow.
Yes, very well said, Mr. Clent. Now, before we end, do you have anything to say or add?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. So, overall, The Adam Project is an enjoyable and exciting science fiction movie with an interesting plot and compelling performances from the actors. The visuals are stunning, and the movie is sure to please both sci-fi fans rather, and general audiences alike.
Thank you for that wonderful discussion, Mr. Clent. That's all for today's episode of Talkyloggy. Thanks to our sci-fi natic for joining us and giving us this review of the Adam Project. Be sure to tune in for more science fiction. As we go to the final discussion, we'll be right back.
Welcome to the Talkyloggy podcast with your host, Clent Logronio. We'll explore the connection between science, technology, and society. Today, we're diving into the impact of the Adam Project, which is a film in which a boy and his father travel through time to fix the future. We'll explore the scientific and technological implications of time travel, as well as the impact of this story on our culture. So, let's get started. So this movie is released in 2021, The Adam Project starring Ryan Reynolds as a man who travels through time with his son Adam to fix the future. On the surface, it's a science fiction fantasy, but the film raises a number of issues related to science, technology, and society. One of the major themes in the Adam Project is the use of technology to manipulate time. The film raises a number of ethical and philosophical questions about the power of technology, such as whether it's possible to change the past and what the consequences might be. In particular, the film explores the idea of using technology to control the future and whether this is a beneficial or detrimental use of technology. Another major theme in the film is the power of science. The film's villain, Dr. Taylor, is a scientist who has created a time machine out of his scientific knowledge. This raises questions about the power of science and its potential to be used for good or evil. The film also examines the idea of science being used to control the future and whether or not this is a desirable use of science. Finally, the Adam Project explores the impact of technology and science on society. The film examines how technology and science can be used to control the future and how this could affect human freedom and autonomy. It also raises the issue of whether or not technology and science are beneficial for society and whether or not they should be used to manipulate the future. Well, that's it for today's episode of Talkyloggy. We've explored the implication of the Adam Project for science, technology, and society. We hope this conversation has sparked some thoughts, provoking ideas, and conversations. Until next time, have a great day, everyone.